Welcome everybody to this Friday's Community First Conversation. I'm Cortney Nicolato. I have the absolute honor and privilege of serving as President and CEO of the United Way of Rhode Island. Thanks for joining us. We have so much to discuss today, and I'm truly excited to have these guests with me. You know, one of the things that we've done at the United Way over the last about year and a half now is really champion and continue to talk about the importance of civic engagement. That came out in our conversations. We had 45 community first conversations throughout the state of Rhode Island last year. And in that, we heard loud and clear from Rhode Islanders that being and building stronger neighborhoods requires all of us to take the concerted effort and really, truly engage in our civic responsibilities. And so today we're talking about that. We're going to talk about the importance of our civic engagement and responsibilities with two of, I think, the biggest advocates in that space there is. And first is Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea. Nellie made history when she was sworn in on January 6, 2015, becoming the first Hispanic elected to statewide office in New England. She was reelected to serve in November of 2018. What I love is Nellie, Secretary Gorbea, trying to be formal. Secretary Gorbea believes government should work for people. And we agree wholeheartedly. And so in 2017, she worked to pass automated voter registration, making Rhode Island the 9th state in the country to do so. She's also spent a ton of work. I've had the opportunity to take a look at how she's been preserving our history here in the state of Rhode Island and working with our state archives. She's originally from Puerto Rico, and Secretary Gorbea is a graduate of Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, as well as Columbia University. Secretary Gorbea, thank you for being here and spending time with us today.
Thank you so much, Cortney. And thank you to United Way for bringing us together at these really difficult times for really important conversations.
Oh, I appreciate it. And so one of the first questions we ask any guest is, you know, one of the things that we talk about at the United Way is being community first. Each and everything that we do is community focused. Every decision that we make, we say, does this put community first? And so I ask you, what does community first mean to you?
Community first is like the air we breathe. It's, you know, community is so important and has to be put first because human beings are by nature communal. Look at the pandemic and how difficult it's been for us to stay away from each other, from be this distant, and we have to do it for the time being. But putting community first is also part of the reason why I served on the United Way board for several years. It's also why I've run for office, which is how do we improve the community around us in a way that benefits all?
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And that's what it's about. It's about all of us taking our steps that we need to preserving and strengthening the community around us, right? So it truly is communal. John Marion is the Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island. John has been Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island since 2008. In that role, he serves as the organization's lead advocate and spokesperson. He's led a number of successful legislative campaigns to reform the state's campaign finance disclosure system, restore full jurisdiction of the state ethics committee. He actually enjoys going to ethics committee meetings. It is a big deal, and he serves as the champion to make sure that our government is working fairly and working for us. John also sits on the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee, which I have a privilege of sitting on as well. And it's a group focused. It was charged by the governor about a year and a half ago to ensure that we have an accurate and complete count here in the state of Rhode Island. So John, thank you for being part of our conversation today.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so grateful to be joining United Way, which has been such a great partner. We're going to talk about the census more, but I can't say enough about United Way and your personal leadership in the census effort that's so critically important to the state.
Great. Well, so John, I'm going to ask the same question I asked Secretary Gorbea. What does community first mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of echo the Secretary's comments. I think the pandemic has probably changed the way I would answer this question. I think I used to think of communities as separate. That Rhode Island was a collection of different communities, and I think we're realizing that we are just one large community, and that interconnectedness is really our greatest strength. And once we've seen it wither a little bit at the edges because of the pandemic, we appreciate the strength that comes with the community. So I would say community first means just, for me personally, thinking about how that interconnectedness exists and how we can build on that interconnectedness to be a better community.
I love it. What's critically important, and I think you acknowledge that so well, is that I've been so inspired by how our community has come together through this process, how we have looked out for each other, everything from checking in on a neighbor to coming together to raise critical funds. We've done that, and we've done that with a sense of pride. And I think I hope that is something that comes and continues well after we have beaten this virus. And I think our community needs it. It deserves it. And so thank you for recognizing that. So we're going to talk first about voting. Voting, I know I don't have my sticker on, but I have voted this year, and my husband as well. And it was actually a great experience to vote by mail because I got to show my kids the process too. So they got to be engaged. But COVID-19 is going to be difficult anyway, and add an election year, a presidential election year to it. So Secretary Gorbea, will you share a little bit about what's going on and all the amazing work that you guys have done at the state on our ability to continue to vote even during a pandemic?
Yes, thanks, Cortney. Yes. So this has been a little bit of an interesting year. We all knew, and those of us who have been working on elections knew that 2020 was going to be an intense year. Presidential election cycles usually are, but you put a pandemic on top of that and it makes it even more interesting. Those of you who wonder why we do government service, those of us who are in it, every day could be different than what you expected it to be. So this year for the presidential primary, not only did we move the date of the election to June 2nd, which is next Tuesday, but we really encouraged, in light of the pandemic and the social distancing requirements that we need to preserve in order to keep people healthy, we really sought to make it a primarily mail ballot election. And here I want to pause and say that we already had a mail ballot system here in Rhode Island. So we were not inventing something from scratch, but we were modifying something that hadn't been really used as much for a number of reasons. And so in this presidential primary, most Rhode Islanders will be voting from home like you did and like your husband did. And it can be a really wonderful experience to do this with your kids and to have conversations about what voting means. But I have to make sure that I remind everybody that today, Friday, and tomorrow, Saturday, at the very latest, you should be voting and putting that in the mailbox to be picked up. We want to make sure that your ballot gets to the Board of Elections by 8 p.m. on Tuesday, June 2nd. They have a deadline that's a deadline received, not postmarked. So if you still have it on, Saturday night or Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Monday, go to your city or town hall. There should be a drop box there, and you can drop it off there. Every city and town will have one. The Board of Elections, who is now in charge of the process of voting, they're a separate agency and they run the actual election day events, is preparing these drop boxes all over the state. So you can do that. Now, if you don't do that, or if you didn't get to vote by mail, you can still vote on June 2nd. There will be polling places in every single one of the 39 cities and towns, but there will be only 47. That's versus what the Board of Elections was going to do, which was originally like 180. So a lot fewer polling locations, probably one only in your city or town. Providence is an exception. They'll have 4. Pawtucket has 3. Cranston, Warwick, Coventry have 2. Everybody else has just 1. You can go to vote.ri.gov and find out the location of that polling place. Please bring your mask and be ready to wait, because while in other elections we try to process people quickly, this time around we want to make sure we do it safely. So that's a little bit of what people should be expecting over the next few days. We're currently right now during the emergency mail ballot time period. So again, if you didn't apply for a mail ballot or for whatever reason didn't receive one, you can make arrangements to vote today and Monday at city or town hall. And if you have your ballot already, you can drop it off there.
That's awesome. And I know in my packet, I also had a list of some of those locations that you can drop off your ballot. I know it does look different this year for certain, but I think you guys have done a great job ensuring that we're all communicated clearly and effectively on what the steps were to vote. So looking ahead, even though it feels like it's really hard to do that in a pandemic, you know, what will November look like? It's a presidential election. There's lots of potential bonds that might be on the ballot. So share with us a little bit, at least what the thought process is so far for November.
Yes. So, you know, this June 2nd presidential primary is going to serve as a really important lesson. I'm going to be convening a group of the Board of Elections, the local boards of canvassers, groups like Common Cause Rhode Island, who has been at the forefront of advocating, along with the League of Women Voters, the ACLU, and a number of other community groups. We're going to get together and talk about, you know, what did we learn about the process for June 2nd's primary? And from those lessons learned, then improve upon September and November. Right now, a lot of the questions that I'm getting are from candidates about the signature verification process. I have a bill that I'm drafting where we're hoping to propose some flexibility to the General Assembly leadership, but the ball is going to be in their court to see, you know, what measures they take. I believe that we have to be ready for a predominantly mail ballot primary and general election in the fall. We just don't know what the pandemic is going to bring, and elections are not easy to turn around on a dime. And every other state in the country is trying to do this as well. So when you go to put, you know, an order for mail ballot envelopes, now we're going to be competing with pretty much all of the other states. So we want to make sure that we're ready so that Rhode Islanders can safely execute that incredibly important right to vote. And we've been meeting with the Department of Health on this. I had a meeting with the Dr. McDonald and along with the Board of Elections, just trying to figure out, you know, what does this look like? And I know that the board has devised some social distancing and personal protective equipment, but I have to tell you, I'm concerned. How are we going to find enough poll workers to have staffing the polling locations? Most of those poll workers tend to be retirees. They're at a, you know, critical age. So whether it's that or the fact that senior centers may not be polling locations in this go around, I think we're going to see some real crunches into the system. So we have to be prepared to predominantly vote by mail again.
And to that point, you know, obviously there's a ton of questions around privacy and the security. There was already, right? Regardless of how the format of voting looks like. And I know you're involved at the national level around that. Will you share a little bit about how Rhode Island is looking and thinking about ensuring that our votes are, one, accurate and secure?
Oh, absolutely. And here, the benefit is that we've had a mail ballot system that has been in place and that has been improved over time. The cornerstone of the security of the mail ballot process is the signature verification. And so when people ask me, well, how can I trust that it's not somebody else who's applying for a mail ballot? Well, you have to apply for a mail ballot. You sign that application. That application is then reviewed by your local board of canvassers. against the signature that we have in the voter registration system from when you originally registered. If that doesn't match, they will try to contact you to make sure that this is something you requested. Then once that's approved and we're told, okay, go ahead, send that person the ballot, that ballot comes with not just the sticker, but also an oath envelope that you fill out. Now, for the presidential primary, there are 2 optional fields that the Board of Elections included, where you can put either your driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social. That's so that in case the person reviewing that envelope now against the signature in the ballot application, and this is at the Board of Elections, they have some sort of question, it's almost identical, but not quite. They can look at that information and make sure that that matches as well. And then that proceeds, and then your ballot is thrown into a pile and counted. People ask me about, well, you know, what about the privacy? Well, all of the envelopes are opened, put in a pile, and then somebody just in huge numbers is opening and putting these ballots through the machines. So, and the counting of those is a public process, thanks to the hard work of Common Cause and a number of other organizations. So if you have any questions about how this works, feel free to make arrangements to come by and witness it. It's actually fascinating. There's a lot of security in place. If you ask for a mail ballot and you then try to vote at the polling location, we will have already marked you as having been sent a mail ballot, so that poll worker knows to not let you just go in as if you were a new voter. You would have to, if you insist on voting, then you would be given a provisional ballot, which again is reviewed versus the information that we have in the system to make sure you're not double voting. So lots of things so that people, Rhode Islanders, can absolutely trust the integrity of the system and vote from home where it's safe and they can keep their families safe.
That's great. And Nellie, I know that as we look at, you know, the presidential election nationwide and the concerns nationwide, I know Rhode Island has been at the forefront. You know, as you're putting your national cap on, what are the things that you're concerned about as we're thinking about privacy and security at the national level?
So yes, when I ran for Secretary of State back in 2013, 2014, the last thing I thought is that I'd have to get security clearance as part of this job. But it's been fascinating to be a part of building this new level of security in our elections nationally. And I'm part of a group of secretaries that works very closely with the Department of Homeland Security and the Center for Internet Security on making sure that our cyber systems are protected. The central voter registration system, every city and town. Any kind of attack on any community is a potential attack on our systems. And so everything from, you know, communicating and partnering with the federal government to making sure that my own employees are trained constantly on how to identify and not click on phishing emails, which is the #1 way in which hackers get into voting systems. We've done all of that hard work. For several years now, we've had cybersecurity summits with local boards of canvassers and the Board of Elections to make sure that we transmit everything that we're learning from the national level down all the way to the local level. It's a very different system now. I think what keeps me up at night is knowing that in the 2016 election, there was a concerted attack on our election by foreign governments to try to influence our elections. And they're using it with the things that are really difficult issues for our country, issues of race, issues of gender, issues of hate. And so we need to be very vigilant that when we're looking at stuff on social media, we are not falling prey to bots or to agendas from other places. You know, so if there's one thing, there's 2 things I want to say is, one, your trusted source for how elections work, where do I go, basic information should be vote.ri.gov. That's your government site. Don't go to a third party that tells you that they can give you your polling location or your ballot or whatever. Go to vote.ri.gov for that basic elections information. And then the other thing is, think twice before you share something that just gets you really riled up, because you never know whether that's actually a real event or not. Is it coming from a trusted source or not? You know, one of the most astonishing things that I've seen as Secretary of State is the ability of entities to do fake videos. It's crazy. And you know, there's no way for a regular human being to figure out what's real and what's not. And so these attacks on our trusting of our governmental systems is, I think, really, really difficult. And I'm glad that we are a society where we have organizations like Common Cause and the League of Women Voters and these ACLU and all of these advocacy groups that are out there, you know, speaking to, you know, the need to work together, and United Way in its community building, because in the end, we have to come together as a country if we're going to move forward.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think one last question for you, because I know you have to hop off, but you know, I've been, you know, I have a former colleague of mine that says, democracy is not a spectator sport. It's one of my favorite quotes.
It is.
I use it way too often. I might have even said it last week in my conversations, last Community First conversations, but you know, what are your suggestions if someone wants to get involved in democracy, if they want to take action? There's so many things that I know that are action oriented right now. And what would you suggest?
Well, the first and foremost, which is the subject of what we're here for, is of course to vote. Voting is the #1 way that you can make your voice heard. And when I talk to particularly students, you know, I say, you know, it's not that your candidate always wins or your cause always wins, but it is so important to continue to participate, because you will be heard one way or another if you vote. And what I need is for everybody watching this to encourage others to vote. We can't let the negativity that is permeating some of our, you know, parts of our society to say, oh, it doesn't really matter. No, now more than ever, it matters that you vote. And so, you know, the other thing is that when you do go vote, vote the whole ballot. A lot of attention gets placed on the presidential election, but some of the most important decisions in your everyday life are made at the state and local level. And we have this thing that we call down ballot, you know, sort of drop off, where people will vote for president or Congress, and then they'll be like, I don't know, whatever. Those other state and local races are really critical. And now if you're voting from home, you can actually engage your family members, your kids, in researching, oh, so what does a secretary, no, I'm not going to be on this ballot, but you know, what does your city council do or your town council do? Those are really important conversations to have with your children. And you know, democracy is not just a spectator sport. I mean, it's really challenging in some ways. Our democracy is complicated. If you move from, you know, North Kingstown to Providence, you change the bottom third of your ballot. You now have to learn a new form of government. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. They kind of think, oh, yeah, I took civics in 4th, 5th grade. I know 3 branches of government. I'm done. No, civics in our country requires lifelong learning. And so we've made it easy on my website to have some of those lessons. We've been engaged with a lot of school teachers to try to bring that to local schools. So those are the ways in terms of the election. But your next speaker will speak eloquently and very passionately about the other way that you can absolutely make yourself count, which is the 2020 census. That is another really important issue. So I'll let him talk about that.
Great segue, Secretary, and thank you for being part of our discussion today. We really appreciate it. You know, the importance of your voice being heard is ever present, and I think even more so now. If you have a concern about what's going on in your child's school, go to the school board. If you have a concern about the budget for your town and some of the things that they're taking away, go to town council meetings. If you can't, write letters, make phone calls, everything that you can to ensure that your voice is being heard, because your voice matters in every conversation being had at any level of government today. So thank you for encouraging that, Secretary, and thank you for your time. I much appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you, United Way, and go out and vote, everybody.
Awesome. Moving on to the census. You know, one of the things that I think about, John, is 3.8 billion. That's the number that I continue to have in my head and continue to think about, and talk a little bit about what that means to Rhode Island, what that number means to Rhode Island.
Yeah. So if you read the headlines right now, there's the biggest challenge facing state government, other than the physical pandemic, right, is the deficit in our state budget. And the estimates are coming in at perhaps 800 million for the next fiscal year, 200 to 300 million for the fiscal year that ends at the end of June. The total state budget is about $10 billion, right? Nice, pretty big round number. And the number you mentioned, Courtney, is 3.8 billion. So almost 40% of that 10 billion comes to the state from the federal government in response to how many people we have in the state. And the way we figure out how many people we have in the state is through the United States Census that's occurring right now. And so if we have a dramatic undercount, meaning if not everyone who is here, and it's everyone who is here, we're not just counting citizens. If everyone who is here is not counted, we are not going to get our share of federal money back. And that's going to translate directly into all sorts of services, the obvious ones, healthcare, education funding, but some other things that we don't think about, public safety grants. You know, the fire trucks are often paid for by federal grants that are given to the cities and towns using formulas that are in the law. And those formulas have in their denominator how many people are in your city or town, or how many people are in your state. So what we're trying to do is encourage people to participate in the census for not just for political representation, which we can talk about, not just because it's their civic duty, it's in the US Constitution, but because it helps the state's bottom line as well. And it helps your city and town's bottom line. It helps your kids' schools' bottom line, your local health center's bottom line. Pretty much every part of our lives is touched in some way by a federal program or a state program that is federally funded and is tied to the census.
Yeah, and I often will say, you know, as you're driving sometime over the course of the weekend, look at the roads, look at the park, look at the services that are provided in your neighborhood or in your community. I'm gonna bet your bottom dollar that there is some level of federal support coming. The schools your kids go to, the tools that they have, all of that is in some way, shape, and form is supported through what's called formula funding. So, you know, we look at the dollars that we've received as a state through the CARES Act for the state of Rhode Island through the pandemic. That was formula funded based on population. And so without an accurate and complete count, it is truly difficult for us to maintain that $3.8 billion. But you touched already, also, John, on, you know, our congressional representation. And, you know, I think that initially as census was coming around, there was a lot of talk about us being at risk for losing a congressional seat. Can you touch a little bit about that and how the census is connected to it?
Yeah, sure. So for people who aren't that familiar, you know, the census is actually the very first thing in the Constitution from 1789 that the government's supposed to do, right? So it was really the first thing that when our Constitution was ratified, that the government set out to do. And the reason it set out to conduct a census was to decide how many seats each state would get in the House of Representatives. And so since 1789, Rhode Island has had either 2 seats or 3 seats in the House of Representatives. We have not had 1 seat in the House since 1789. And slowly, as Rhode Island's population has stagnated, we're about 1 million people in the state. And other parts of the country have grown, the Sun Belt, the Southwest. They have, because there's a formula set by Congress, they have taken more congressional seats, and states in the Northeast, in the Rust Belt, have been losing congressional seats. Well, we just kept our second congressional district 10 years ago. We're right on the cusp of losing one after the current census is completed later this year. And that would go into effect with the 2022 election. We're like painfully close, and it's within reach. If we have a really successful census, perhaps we could keep it. It's not the only reason people should participate, but it's certainly a good reason. And if we don't manage to maintain that second congressional district, it doesn't mean we didn't fail at doing a good count. We've been trending away from that for decades now. It's just this would be the cycle it caught up with us. But political representation is incredibly important, right? We would go from having two of the smallest congressional districts in terms of population, about 500,000 each, to one of the largest, if not the largest in the United States, with over 1 million people represented by one member of Congress. That translates into it's harder to get access to government services, because oftentimes when people's Social Security check doesn't come, they call their member of Congress in their local office. Well, there will be fewer offices to call and fewer staff to answer that call. It would translate into electoral college votes. We've talked about with the secretary about November's presidential election. Rhode Island gets 4 electoral college votes. That's the number of seats we have in the Senate, 2 that every state has, and then the number of seats we have in the House of Representatives. So this would be the last time we'd have 4 electoral college votes. Representation is incredibly important. We are a large, a diverse population. That diversity is represented better if we have more representatives. And so it's important for that reason. I'll say one last thing too about representation is it's also used to draw the districts that are behind me, right? That's the Rhode Island House and the Rhode Island Senate. I didn't plan that. And the House is 75 districts, Senate's 38 districts. Those districts are drawn based on census data, right? And so if you care about your district in Providence or your district in Burrillville or Westerly, and you want to have an accurate representative district in the General Assembly, you need a complete census as well.
No, it's a great point. And, the impact is so far reaching, and census is at the core of so much. So, so thanks for explaining that in a bit more detail. I think it's really informative. And, a little bit, we hear the term, and I know I know what the term means, but I don't think everyone really understands what hard to count is and where Rhode Island's hard to count population is. There's, one thing that I think is important that folks may not realize is really the census is where someone is living normally, I mean, pandemic aside, but normally on April 1st, 2020. And so college students is a great example that I often give. That college student should be completing their census in the place where they would have been living as of April 1st, which would be their college campus. And we find that colleges are actually what's considered a hard to count population, because a lot of college kids think that their parents are completing it and including them, and that is in fact not the case. So talk a little bit about our hard to count populations, and specifically some details about some of those populations that we look into very strongly as we're thinking about the census.
Yeah, so the hard to count is actually a term that the Census Bureau uses to define populations who respond to the census at lower rates. And some, I think, are pretty obvious. So it tends to be urban census tracts, and the census has special terminology for their geography, but the state's divided up into roughly 200 census tracts. They don't correspond to cities and towns exactly, But we have certain census tracts that are identified as hard to count. And, you know, the urban core, Pawtucket, Central Falls, Providence, up to Woonsocket, down to Newport, has the vast majority of those tracts. But there are other tracts that have unique populations that you wouldn't necessarily think. So the census tract that contains the University of Rhode Island is particularly hard to count because you have a lot of off-campus students. It's important to note, on-campus students aren't the problem. So the college or university actually provides the Census Bureau with that data. It's those off-campus students. So it's the URI student living in the rental in Narragansett, or it's the Johnson Wales student living on the west side in a house with their friends, or the Salve student who's living someplace in Newport. The students tend to, well, first of all, the Census Bureau doesn't send you the questionnaire, they send it to the household, right? They send one piece of mail for each household. And, you know, when I was in college, I didn't really consider that a household, right? And I wouldn't have opened that piece of mail and said to my, 5 housemates, okay, let me, what's your race, what's your age, and so forth. And I wouldn't have filled it out. And so that's why college students are particularly hard. But there are other hard to count populations. Children 0 to 5 years of age, right? It's very obvious. They're not filling the census out for themselves. They are actually the most undercounted demographic group in the United States. And so it has largely to do with the fact that there are many vulnerable children who do not have a stable home situation. And so they may be living with grandma, or they may be living with mom, or it may not be clear who they're living with. And so it's not clear who's filling out the form and including them in the household. So a lot of effort has been put into young children. And so there are lots of groups like that. I'll give an example of the disparity. So Rhode Island's, as of yesterday, 58.4% of Rhode Island households had filled out the census. Households, not people. Barrington, 78.7. So more than 20% higher in Barrington. Central Falls, 38.6, right? And so there's huge inequities in census response. And they tend to track the socioeconomic inequities we have in our state as well. And this is not unique to Rhode Island. This is true in every state. And so the people who might need those government services the most are the people who are least likely to be counted. And so sort of flattening that curve, so to speak, has been a big goal of ours and yours as we've worked to do this outreach.
And John, to that point, I know that early on in the census process, there was lots of concern around privacy. Will this information get to ICE? Will this information get to other federal agencies? There was a question at one point on the draft of the census that asked if someone was undocumented or not. There's a citizenship question. And so luckily that is not the case. There is not a citizenship question on the census, but there are concerns still, especially for our neighbors who are undocumented. Would you kind of share a little bit about those concerns and really provide some context as to how the census is thinking about that?
Yeah, so you have to, again, go back to 1789. The census has always been about counting everyone who's in the United States, right, other than on vacation. And so if you're living in the United States and you are a person, you should be counted in the census, regardless of immigration status. And so there was an attempt, as you said, to put an immigration question on. It was struck down ultimately by the US Supreme Court and wasn't included. But there's a long history to the census keeping census information private, right? And so there's actually a federal law that was passed in the 1970s called Title 13. And Title 13 says that the Census Bureau, not only can they not share your individual responses with, obviously, the public, they can't share your individual responses with any other government agency. And any Census Bureau employee who does will be put in jail. It's a felony, a punishable felony. And they have enforced it, right? So there have been instances, there was a famous instance in the early 80s where the FBI, a Census Bureau employee, you know, and the Census Bureau, keep in mind, at peak operations is over 300,000 employees. There was some criminal investigation of the Census Bureau employee in Colorado Springs. The FBI raided the census office in Colorado Springs, seized the records. The Census Bureau went to court, federal judge said, Title 13, you give those records back. We cannot even, you know, have a volunteer follow a census door knocker. That would violate Title 13. It is a real sacrosanct thing to the Census Bureau. So they won't share it with ICE. They won't share it with the IRS. They can't, or they'll be prosecuted. So people can rest assured that they can fill it out. And other than the aggregate statistics, right? How many people are there in Rhode Island or Central Falls? Or how many people are there in the census tract, which is a big, large population? They're not going to share how individual household data for 70 years. That's the embargo period. So if you want to know something about the, I'll do math in my head, 1940 census, you can find it, right, about your grandparents. But if you want anything since then, you aren't going to be able to get a hold of it.
And, you know, one of our viewers mentioned that it was easy to fill out. I know from my perspective, I have a family of 4. It might have took me 7 minutes online to complete. We did get a question, you know, if they know someone that needs help in filling that out, can they help them? Is there an issue with someone else, a neighbor or friend, helping them complete the census?
Yeah, so, and I should be, you know, like if I were like a NASCAR driver, I'd be talking about my sponsor all the time. I should be, if you want to fill it out, you go to my2020census.gov, my2020census.gov. And if there's a language issue for that person, there are phone numbers. So I guess I'll back up. This is the first census where they want you to fill it out online, right? So in the past, that's been an option. But this time, for the first time, in order to save money and make it more efficient, the Census Bureau is encouraging everyone to fill it out online. So that's what you can do on that website. If you have a language issue and it's not available online in your language of choice, there are phone numbers. I won't read them all off, but there are phone numbers available at my2020census.gov that you can call. There are dozens of languages where there are instructions, and then there are a subset of those languages where you can actually call the phone number and a native speaker or translator will help you fill it out over the phone. It's secure through those phone lines, those census lines, and it can be in your native language. If you need physical assistance, people can do that. The Census Bureau doesn't want us volunteers going door to door and helping people. But if you have a friend who might be physically challenged and is having trouble with the computer, yes, you can help them. They don't prosecute that. But if it's a language issue, probably your best bet is to use one of the phone numbers.
Great. And over the course, you know, I know that because of the pandemic, the census has been extended a little bit longer, but can you share just a little bit about if someone hasn't filled out their census? I know you mentioned a little bit about that already, but what will the next few months look like? And what could they see given the pandemic has changed a lot of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So The census, every household in Rhode Island was mailed the first of a series of pieces of mail on March 12th. In the 58.4% of households that have filled it out, now a majority of households, responded to the mail that was sent. The first piece of mail had a code. You put that code into the website and you filled out the form. Later mailings for people who didn't fill it out online did include the actual paper form. So we do see people filling out the paper form and returning them. That was supposed to end in mid-May, and they were supposed to do what's called non-response follow-up. We know it as door knocking, right? That's why the census is the largest non-military exercise the federal government does, because as I mentioned, they hire up to 350,000 employees to knock on doors throughout the United States to follow up on households who didn't fill it out online or fill it out on paper and send it in the mail. That's been delayed. So non-response follow-up at the soonest in Rhode Island won't start until next month. And that may be subject to even further delays. We don't know. We're seeing it be rolled out in states that have been less hard hit by the pandemic sooner, and rolled out later in states like Rhode Island that have been really hard hit. Those folks are going to knock on your door up to a dozen times to try to get somebody in the household to fill out the paper form. The most important thing you can do to prevent those people from having to go knock on doors, to protect their health, to be quite frank, is to fill it out online, or if you get a paper form in the mail. The ultimate deadline was supposed to be July 31st, right? If on August 1st you try to fill it out, you weren't going to be given the option. That's been extended to October 31st. So the drop dead deadline right now for filling it out is October 31st. We're going to continue our efforts locally, and the Census Bureau will also continue its efforts locally and nationally to encourage participation up to October 31st. But really, like, our most important window is now, while everyone's home and sort of been receiving the mail, and then there's national and local advertising that's going out. So people are sort of hearing about the census. We think now's when they're most likely to fill it out. So that's why we've been putting all our efforts into the earlier part.
No, it's great. And, a couple of things. We love to end our conversations every week with action items. Mm-hmm. What are the things that we can do? One is complete the census. You've heard loud and clear. It's easy to do. It will take you minutes. I promise you, minutes to complete. As well as going on to vote.ri.gov and see if you, one, are registered to vote. If you are not registered to vote, please do so for the September and November elections, but also ensure that you are sharing this information with others. The best thing that we can do in our community is educate and empower others. And so to complete the census, and to ensure that they are on and ready to vote in the coming elections. United Way is very proud of really bringing the community together, really talking about civic engagement and the importance of having your voice being heard. But also, we've been investing dollars in this work too. We're very proud to have joined the Rhode Island Complete Count. We've invested $125,000 to work with organizations throughout the state and social service agencies and others to get the word out on the importance of the count, to help dispel some of the myths that we talked about today, and understand that we are working in a very different world than we even knew just a few months back. But these critical steps, voting and census, could not be more important than they are today. So John, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for talking about the importance of the work. If folks want to learn more about what Common Cause does above and beyond census, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I'll add two more things to do very briefly.
Sure.
One is serious, which is, you mentioned, get involved in your community. It could not be easier right now. If you're able to do this, you're able to now attend your school board meeting via Zoom, or your town council meeting via Zoom, or the zoning board, or join me at the Ethics Commission next Tuesday morning. The other is fun, which is the State Board of Elections. You heard about it earlier. Is actually running a contest to do a Rhode Island themed I voted sticker. So we always use the generic ones in Rhode Island, and we get jealous of Georgia, which has a peach on theirs, or Maryland, which has a crab. Well, voting ends on May 31st, so you only have a couple of days. But if you go to elections.ri.gov, you can vote. There's 8 finalists. I don't have a picture of them, for your favorite I voted sticker. That's just sort of fun and light, and something particularly for kids, who can't vote in the real election, they can vote in that election. So encourage your kids to pick one of those. To answer your question, if you want to learn more about our work, you go to commoncauseri.org. It's real simple. We actually have a page that you click on that homepage that is our response to the COVID crisis and how we're dealing with changes to elections and open meetings and things like that.
And continue. Thanks, John. And, on the voting of the stickers, our family has been voting early and often, and loving it. We've got a couple in the running, or at least our choices. And that's a really fun, and to that point, bring your children involved in the process. My kids have come and voted with me for years. And same thing as with the mail ballot, they were sitting right next to me. They completed the census with us. This is all part, the next time I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, the next time the census comes, my 12-year-old's going to complete it. And so I think it's incredibly important for them to see that your parents and family, that you take that civic responsibility as serious as they should. And so, we can only continue to model that for others. And so to learn more about what's going on at United Way, and specifically how we're supporting these initiatives, visit our various social media entities, Live United RI, our website, liveunitedri.org. If you want to be involved and be supporting this work, a gift to our Community Impact Fund is now more important than ever, and we hope you will consider that gift and working with us. Also, our volunteer center is a great place to learn, and all that can be, you can get more information on our website. John, thank you. I'm grateful to Secretary Gorbea for her time. Next week, we're going to be talking about diversity in nonprofit organizations and the importance that we put on that work. We're going to have Marcela Betancourt from the Latino Policy Institute. We're going to have Kelly Nevins from the Women's Fund here in Rhode Island, and others joining us as well. So we're looking forward to that. Again, thank you. Happy Friday. Please stay safe and please stay well.